What we're up against is not the Palestinian negotiator. What we are up against is the security interests of the world superpower in the region. And that's why even Trump ends up landing very close to where Nixon landed, to where Carter landed, to where Clinton landed. All of them go back to the same place because there is a gravitational force that is shaping these negotiations.
Hi folks, James here, and welcome to the Spyro Circle. A lot of my conversations take place around Israel's high-tech sector, startup nation, cybersecurity, AI, defense tech, you know it. But I'm super interested in the geopolitics of the region and of the world. I've been writing about Trump and Washington and Europe and Israel and all of these issues that I've never really explored in my work before, at least on this podcast. So recently, I spoke with Gidi Grinstein. He's an Israeli entrepreneur, and he runs a non-profit called Tikkun Olam Makers. They help with prosthetics for the disabled or the elderly. But interestingly, he was actually one of the people at the Camp David negotiations back in the 90s. So he's seen all about the Israel and Palestinian conflict, and he knows about negotiations, he knows about strategy, he knows about peace processes, why they're successful and why they fail. So today, as we're approaching elections in Israel and midterms in America, and the war with Iran is going on, I really wanted to find out more about the regional understanding from someone like him. Because I can read and write as much as I like about it, but it was really having the experience and the wisdom shared to me by someone at the table was super exciting. So I really hope you enjoy. Gidi, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me. Really a pleasure and an honor to be with you.
No, there's so much I want to discuss with you, and there's so much I want to hear, not only about what you're doing today, but of course, all of the things you've done in the past that have kind of brought us basically to this moment today. So I just want to kind of list a few things. You were at Camp David, you built a think tank, you designed Birthright, and now you're 3D printing prosthetics in New York. So I suppose my first question is, how do all of those things connect for you?
Well,
Where does that stream come from?
well, that's a great question, and could be the beginning of a book if I ever think about writing one. But basically, from a very young age, I was very interested in doing things that move the needle for a lot of people. My priority was always helping my community, the Jewish people, obviously the state of Israel that I come from, but also humanity. So I always try to connect all these things together and find the ideas that could help all of them. And it took a while for all these things to evolve. I was born in 1970, so I finished my military service in the 1990s. And the big thing that was happening geopolitically in the 1990s was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and therefore America becoming the world's sole superpower. American Jewry was out of its main challenge, which was to save Soviet Jewry. Soviet Jewry had just, came out. So that geopolitics had dramatic effects on the Jewish world, and therefore, at the bottom of the ladder, also on me, in two major things. First of all, there was the opportunity for the state of Israel to engage in a political process with the Arab world and with the Palestinians. That was the biggest historical thing going on in the 1990s. I finished my military service in 1995, and I said, this is the biggest thing happening, and I want to be part of it. So I just joined a group that was involved in designing the political process with the Palestinians and with the Arab world. So that's how I got into the peace process. And just at the same time, I saw this idea that every young Jewish man or woman, every young Jewish person should have the right, as a birth right, to come to Israel for a substantive visit to get to know their country, because we Israelis were being brought up with the notion that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And that's a very unique statement compared to all other countries in the world, because most other countries in the world associate themselves with their residents, with their nationals. Here is a country that says, I am relevant to members of a people. Most of these people doesn't even live within my territory. So this was a really a radical idea. and all those two things are happening at the same time. I began to work on the issues related to the peace process in July 1995, and the first time I hear about birthright is September 1995. So, I was very young. I
Yeah,
was
so
op-
yeah, just for those who may not be keeping up with the math, you're about 25 years of age. Is that right?
I was 25. Yes.
Yeah, so extraordinarily young to be at that moment in history, right? That's an extraordinary image. I mean, I guess we can all paint in our minds. And you were basically, when you were there, you were part of helping translate some of these messages, right, from the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, in terms of kind of measuring conflict and trying to translate this political rhetoric into basically something to
So,
work with. What did that teach you? Like that's an amazing position for such a young man to be in. Anywhere, any person to be in.
So that's just if I just focus on the on my work in the peace process. It was a 7 year period. It began 1995 and ended in almost in 2002. So I begin as a junior. I'm actually carrying the bags of academics and professors and diplomats and all these people who are the seniors, who are the leaders of the field, and I'm willing to do anything. I was a major in the Navy. I come down, my salary is cut by half. I was willing to do anything to be part of history. So even a minor part, even like the guy who carries the bags. But gradually you become indispensable. You do the work, you win their trust, they give you more assignments, they give you more responsibility. 1 year, second year, bigger projects, bigger responsibilities. But in the last, let's say in year 3 and 4 of this process, I started coordinating a massive effort to envision what the agreement between Israel and the Palestinians could be. Remember that at the time, I'm talking about 96, 97, nobody actually was sure that there would ever be a negotiation to try to resolve the conflict, let alone for us being outside of government. I was working in a nonprofit to bring together all these experts to begin to plan issue by issue, to analyze it, to learn about it. We were the first people to learn about many things, to put together the knowledge, to prepare files. At the time, these were real files in real folders, about every single topic, every single dimension of the negotiation. So 1999, Ehud Barak is elected the prime minister. I had no association with him, no relationship with him. But then suddenly he gets in the, he gives an interview and he says, within 14 months, we will know whether we can have an agreement with the Palestinians. And I was shocked. I was sitting at home and I said, this guy is going to need my work. So I just made a few phone calls, and shortly thereafter, I get one of these life changing phone calls that says, "Show up tomorrow because the position of being the secretary of the negotiation team is open. If you show up, the position is yours, and if you don't, someone else is going to do it." So that's how I became the secretary of the Israeli delegation, which 1 year later leads to me being in the Camp David summit that you alluded to earlier with President Clinton and Prime Minister Barak and Arafat, which was really the historical moment. And many people think that this was the end of the negotiation, but this was actually, in many ways, the beginning of 6 months of negotiation that led to the real summit of the negotiation, which was called the Clinton Ideas. It was an attempt by President Clinton, like President Trump right today, to put forward a set of parameters that will end the conflict. So it was, you could say, 6 months of intense, really intense, high-level international negotiations that was involved with from July 2000 to January 2001. So what does it look like? It looks like many, many sleepless nights. You endless amount of work. You have to be technically. So I was in this unique position where I was one of the very few people who actually knew all the topics of the negotiations and how they relate to each other, how security affects Jerusalem, how Jerusalem affects the issue of Palestinian statehood, that the issue of Palestinian statehood will affect refugees. All of these very complex set of issues. That was my domain. So, and my responsibility is obviously working for my boss, the chief negotiator Gilad Sheo. Together, the both of us, we needed to make sure that all the teams are aligned. And the way you did it is that we had a text of an agreement that we managed almost on a daily basis according to the evolution of the negotiation. And that text of the agreement actually determined the mandate that every team had at any given moment, what they could negotiate and what they could not negotiate, what positions they could put forward and what not, what are the interests that are driving us, what is the red lines that we can never cross according to the political leadership. It was an incredible experience. And let me just say, over the years, I spoke to people who did the same kind of work for other uh, prime ministers and leaders and even not Israelis, and the experience of is always the same. People who worked for Netanyahu, who worked for obviously Sharon and Barak and Olmert. I spoke to all of them throughout these years, and our experience is the same. And it doesn't matter who the chief negotiator is. What matters is that in the position that you are in, you have to be absolutely credible. You have to be totally reliable. You become indispensable for the team.
Wow, that's amazing. You have so much insight into the history and the way that all of these kind of talks go. As you mentioned, you said it's all the same. In what ways is it different? Is there anything today that is surprising you, or anything that you look back on back then that you would do differently? Like how is it different? What are some of the things that are surprising you now?
Well, then it was the first attempt. So there was a sort of I would say, naivete. There was a hope that this could work. Effectively, I mean, many of your listeners will think that there was an attempt to reach peace with the Palestinians in 2001 and it failed, right? But then actually, it was an extended attempt that continued until 2013 because Ehud Olmert, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, had a second attempt to reach an agreement from 2007 to 2009. Sorry, and then Prime Minister Netanyahu had a third attempt from 2010, 2011 until 2013. So in my view, it was one attempt by Israel under three prime ministers from 1999 to 2013, 14-year period where Israel, in some ways, different ways, tried to resolve the conflict with the Palestinians in a final way. But since then, we have basically abandoned that approach. Now, what that means is, obviously, Netanyahu is different from Olmert. Olmert is different from Barak. But at the fundamental element, I would say, on the ground of the negotiations, it's extremely complex. People think it's simple. Yes, state, two states, no two states, establish a Palestinian state. What are the parameters? Refugees. People think in a few big questions like people just throw the word security arrangements. Well, security arrangements is an entire chapter of extremely intricate arrangements. Uh, you know, the rehabilitation of the Palestinian refugees, not in Israel, in Palestine. We're talking about if there would be a Palestinian state. We're talking about 4 million people that whose fate is going to be dramatically affected by the negotiations, who are very significant part of the population of the future Palestinian state, if and when it would have been established. Of course, it was not, but also of Jordan. So there are three states involved here. And then, if you want to have another example of the complexity, look how this agreement affects Jordan. We share water system, security arrangement, border, Jerusalem. Jordan has big interest in Jerusalem. 40% of the Palestinian refugees live in Jordan. So right there, five major topics. And I'm not even mentioning the fact that there will be a Palestinian state that could be an adversary for Jordan. So right there, six major topics where you think it's a bilateral negotiation, but effectively it's a trilateral exercise. So
Wow.
I mean, I could give you multiple dimensions of the complexity of this enterprise, so of course the political leadership affects in two ways. First of all, their political positions, what they're willing to do or not to do, which of course was different between Barak, Olmert, and Netanyahu, but also the style. I'll just speak about Barak. Barak had this very unique combination as a leader, political leader. In some areas, he would give us open, it's called directives. Directive is a general statement of what you can do or you cannot do in the negotiation, but mainly focuses on what you're trying to achieve, not on what you're going to say to the other side. Meanwhile, in other areas, he would be so specific that he would literally dictate the words that we could use. Okay, so you see two
Mhm.
very different styles of a political leader when it comes to the same negotiations. So in one topic, he would say, "Here is the directive," and in another topic, he would give us the words that we could use, and we could not deviate from the words.
How
So
how are things how are things going like today now slash nowadays in this post October 7 kind of during kind of post Iran conflict that's bubbling up with the context that there's an Israeli election in a couple of months for the first time in 5 years. Bennett and Lapid have officially joined together to try and change the top of the government with by getting Netanyahu out, and then of course a few weeks later America will have midterms. So the dynamic in Washington is going to change in the same time that the dynamic in Israel is going to change. So is that what do you think is going to happen kind of nowish, or how do you think that's all going to change what we've been kind
let
of
me
all
just,
experiencing for the last couple of years?
I mean, I think you're probably more interested on the negotiation dynamics than on the politics, right?
Yeah, just like yeah, I mean,
So let me
negotiations are
explain to you how
politics,
it works.
Yeah.
Let's go the Israeli mindset, the Western mindset, in many cases is you get closer to election, let's try to get a deal. Okay, there's in many cases this is a situation where the election creates pressure to finish. For example, I think that Trump may be under similar pressure to get a deal in Lebanon, okay, or could to get a deal in Iran. Meaning, the closer you get to the election, you may want to get a deal. Meanwhile, in the other side, they are operating on a different political cycle or a different political clock altogether. For example, we're dealing with Yasser Arafat, who was the leader of the Palestinian movement and had been the leader for decades before and remained the leader until 2011 when he passed away. So, so they are operating on a different clock. So, on our case, I think in two cases, in Israel's case, I mean, under Barak and under Olmert, they negotiated, both Barak and Olmert, with the Palestinians and creating tremendous political capital, putting tremendous political capital in the deal. And the closer they got to the election, the more they wanted to get the deal. At the same time, the Palestinians were saying, why should we sign with Barak if tomorrow Prime Minister Ariel Sharon is going to be the Prime Minister, and we don't know if he's committed to the deal? Same thing with Olmert. Olmert gets close. He's really pushing for a deal. But the Palestinian side is saying, why should we sign with Olmert if tomorrow Netanyahu is coming in and we're not sure he's going to make the deal? So that the synchronization of the political clocks is very, very important in getting the deal. And I think that Trump may be running into trouble now because he may be under pressure to get the deal before the November election. But the Iranians may be saying, you know what? Who knows? Maybe after the election, he will probably be weaker. So, maybe we could
And
get
where does Bibi fall into that? Because he's also got an election coming up, at the
so
same time.
if
So what
Netanyahu's
pressure is
interest,
Bibi feeling?
I well, I don't I would be very cautious to analyze Netanyahu's interest. I think Netanyahu's interest in this case is not to get the deal. Okay, but I also think that it may be that Trump's interest is to get a deal, and the closest that Trump is to a deal is in Lebanon. Okay, so there could be, and I think you're already seeing tension between the Israeli position and the American position, and I think it could really, I mean, I don't want to be guessing here, but I can see a scenario where the Americans are saying, "Hey, this is the deal. We're finishing the border. Okay, the Israeli-Lebanon border is going to be finished. It's an easy agreement." Fixed or 13 disputed points, and you have a historical agreement about the border between Lebanon and Israel, and then we continue from there. And then Netanyahu would not want this kind of an agreement before the election. That's sort of my kind of sense of what's going on. I don't think that Netanyahu can do any deal in Gaza in his current political situation, and I doubt that he can do a deal in Iran. For sure, in negotiations, there is a concept called ZOPA, Zone of Possible Agreement. So, for sure, right now, there is no ZOPA between Israel and Iran. There could be a ZOPA between the US and Iran, maybe, but there's no ZOPA between Israel and Iran. So, any agreement with Iran out of question and our understandings between Israel and Iran, Israel and Lebanon, if the Americans put down a proposal on the border, there will be an agreement, I believe. And in Gaza, I think right now we're working within the framework of the 20-point plan of Trump. But again, moving from one phase to another will require a lot of compromises, not just on the Hamas side, but also on the Israeli side. So
Mm.
I don't see that happening before the election as well. So the only place where there could be um, um, an agreement that Israel is a part of, is Lebanon.
Mm.
But
Wow.
never make a bet on politics in the Middle East. It's like a very bad thing to do. But if you're
Yeah.
putting a podcast gun
Also,
to my
yeah.
head and say, Gidi, what do you think? Only Lebanon.
Yeah. Also, we have about 1,000 news stories that we're all going to have to put up with and bear up until the October-November timeline comes around. Anyway, hopefully something is sorted a bit before that. But just, a week is a lifetime in politics. And as we've all kind of lived through the
Especially in a
last couple
very
of years.
dynamic period right now.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's all that's kind of pumped up on
But
steroids.
if we have a minute, I do want to say the following thing. President Trump came into office with clean slate. He didn't have anyone on his team that actually knew the historical agreements. They started from scratch and they said, we're going to innovate. We're going to do these things differently. Okay? And he puts forward, when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he puts forward two documents. Okay? One in January 2020 and the other one in October 2025. Okay? So 5 years apart, two teams who are working on this file, zero loyalty to prior agreements, and look at where they landed, right? They
Hmm.
landed squarely within the ideas of the Israel Egypt Camp David Accords of 1978, which are the ideas that shaped the Oslo process of the 1990s. Meaning the American team, which the Israeli government is describing as the best friend ever that Israel had in the White House, with all the superlatives, the American team is going on a tour around the Middle East, unbound by anything that happened in the past. And they land on the same logic of the political process that has been guiding the Middle East since since 1974, effectively. So if you look at Trump plan from January 2020, he says two two nation states for two people. Does it sound familiar? UN General Assembly Resolution 181 from 1947. Okay,
Yeah.
and I could give you 20 points of similarity. Frankly, I always say to my friends, if you take the Trump plan of January 2020, which Prime Minister Netanyahu described as the deal of the century, and you compare it to the positions of Ehud Barak, Prime Minister Barak, on July 2000, upon entering Camp David, even you, James, who you're interested in these topics, you would not be able to tell the difference. Okay, fast forward. Now we're talking about October 2025. Okay, Trump is putting forward the 20-point plan for ending the war in Gaza. Look at this plan and read the Oslo Declaration of Principles from September 1993, and you'll be stunned by the amount of similarities between those two documents. Okay?
Did they definitely start from a blank slate though? They must
They
have
never
lifted
really start
some.
from a blank slate, but they were never bounded by the past.
Mm.
They could have gone anywhere. And so what I'm saying is, and all of that goes back, which is very important, all of that goes back to 1978, President Sadat and President Carter. It goes further back to Henry Kissinger of 1974. So what I want to say right now is not just about the negotiators of today. It's about the brilliance of Henry Kissinger that was able to create an architecture that led to American hegemony in the Middle East. Okay? That's what I explained to a lot of my friends. We're not dealing here with positions. We're dealing here American positions, and stuff like that. No, we're dealing here with an architecture that was created by the most brilliant and American diplomat of the last 100 years, maybe, Henry Kissinger. It was created in the 1970s, and it has served America very, very well because America became the hegemon of this whole area based on that approach. Okay, and that's why there is such force of gravity around these issues because we're not dealing with the weakling Palestinian, who we may think that we can push over here or there. No, we're dealing with the interest of the world's superpower. And that's why we keep landing in the same place. Because what we're up against is not the Palestinian negotiator. What we are up against is the security interests of the world superpower in the region. And that's why even Trump ends up landing very close to where Nixon landed, to where Carter landed, to where Clinton landed, Bush, President Bush, Bush the first, sorry, Bush the second. So W, all of them go back to the same place because there is a gravitational force that is shaping these negotiations. And that's why history is so important.
For sure, 100%. And you know, a lot of the things that are happening now in the context of what's happening in Israel and Iran and Lebanon, as you mentioned, and some of the things that Trump and Washington are trying to navigate are, they say, proving to be quite unpopular. But Trump's idea is, I need to do this now, if not for me, then for the next generation and for the future, because the actions that we're taking now in this region, no other leader before me could do or wanted to do. What do you think are the chances that all of this, when the dust settles, is going to be? I don't want to say peace. I don't want to, I don't want to make too much of a grand prediction, but just in terms of just calming down, as you said, we've been in a turbulent period. What do you think? What do you think it will take for the dust to settle somewhat calmly, if not by Trump, then by Israel, then by whoever?
I think that the probability or possibility of a military victory over Iran is very distant for us right now. I think that window is closed. The Americans have zero appetite for another war. Trump is under tremendous pressure domestically not to engage in a war. He's apparently being challenged by his own base about that. So I don't see another big war on Iran. Maybe I'm wrong, but of course, everything I'm saying, I could be wrong. So I do see a deal. And I think the Iranians have a massive interest, especially after the war, to get a deal that unlocks some of the economic assets that they need in order to rebuild their country. So I can see a deal in Iran. And it will be better than the JCPOA that Obama made, but not anywhere near to what Israel wanted. But that deal is going to be made over Israel's head. And I think, I mean, if I need to bet, in Lebanon, I think that the Americans are very close to a deal if they can reverse the sequence of the deliberations. First, to focus on the border. If they focus on the border, they could have a deal very quickly, stunningly quickly. That is a game-changing deal. When there is just declaring that they're moving on, there's no territorial conflict between Israel and Lebanon, is a historical moment. It's historical for Israel, it's historical for Lebanon. I think it's one of the greatest achievements of Zionism. Every time that the state of Israel establishes a line which becomes a bilaterally agreed, internationally recognized border, is a monumental moment for Zionism, because that's what the Jewish people repatriated to the land, to have our area where we can realize our right of self-determination. So we are just defining the borders of our area. With Egypt, we have some of the border with Jordan is determined. Now, hopefully, God willing, we'll have with Lebanon. But what I'm saying is, and then we'll have to work our way with Syria and the remainder. Anyhow, there's some work to do, but it's tremendous progress. So to me, a border deal with Lebanon is within reach very soon, and I really hope that the Americans do it. It will be good for them and good for us and good for the region. And then working from the border to security, and from security, then it will be the best way to oust Hezbollah, because the entire legitimacy of Hezbollah is then gone, right?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
Lebanon is really in reach. Now, in Gaza, I think that there are two major decisions that the Americans are going to have to make in order to be able to move forward in Gaza. Of course, there needs to be a deal of the dismantling of Hamas, but the point is that according to the 20-point plan, in phase two, there are two sub-phases. In the first sub-phase, you have the introduction of the international security force into Gaza, the withdrawal of Hamas, and Israel's further withdrawal within Gaza to establish a space which is not ruled by Hamas and not by Palestinian Authority. But in the second part, second phase, in the second part of phase two of the 20-point plan of Trump, the Palestinian Authority is supposed to be introduced. And then suddenly, the Palestinian Authority, that is so weak in the West Bank and is being weakened by Israel every day in West Bank, needs to double the number of people it manages, nearly double, extend to another piece of territory, right? So today, not only that doesn't have the capacity, because of what's going on in West Bank, it's diminishing capacity of the Palestinian Authority. So I think that what the Americans will need to do is to say, hey guys, we want to see build up of the Palestinian Authority that prepares it to perform its role in Gaza, and then we may see some progress. But right now, I think the situation in Gaza is stuck. It's not on people's mind. So let's see how it unfolds.
A lot of people are saying that Israel is winning the military war but losing the reputation online kind of sympathy war. Would you agree with that? I mean, it's hard not to agree with that, but what do you have to say about that?
It's first of all, it's a fact of life, and I think that of course, there are dynamics that are beyond our control. There is a new set of, let's call it, platforms of communications that we have not mastered. In the past, there was printed press, and then there was radio, and then there was TV, and then the internet. So each one of these technological revolutions and communications required us to tell our story in a new way, in a different way. And now, of course, there's social media, and we're moving into the whole world of AI, and we're not there. Our game is not there. So that's the technical explanation. The other thing is there is, of course, the polarization of the political systems in the West, which is the primary problem for us. That there is a sort of a radicalization of our American political system, and therefore you see anti-Semitism rising both on the left and the right. So this is, again, a problem that is external to us. But, also, we managed the war in a certain way that was not conducive for making an argument that we want peace. Okay, what happened in Gaza from March 2025 to August 2025, even according to the Israeli government, was a very big mistake. Okay, and the proof of that is that just in the way that we just folded and dismantled, almost everything we said was so sacred, so central to our policy, like controlling the food that goes into Gaza, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, all these tremendous $1 billion Gaza Humanitarian Fund. Where is it? It's gone. Why? Because it didn't work. Okay, and so you have those 4 or 5 months that were devastating. And remember that those 4 or 5 months began by Israel walking away from the ceasefire of January 2025. Okay, so if you look from March to August, this is the moment where we collapsed around the world.
But I would push back on that, though, because support for Israel and support for the IDF was way low, even the days after October 7. It didn't have to go until March 25.
But that was the collapse. I mean, if you're looking at the moment where it really imploded, where some of our friends who used to protect us stopped protecting us, okay? Where journalists turned on us, journalists who were sympathetic to our argument turned on us. The second thing I think, which is very important, is I always say, in the words peace process, the word process is more important than peace. We may or may not reach peace, and even if we reach an agreement, it may be a cold peace like we have with Egypt, and there could be friction points, and there could be all these things. That could always happen, for sure. But you have to be in a process. You have to be presenting yourself as a party who wants to seek peace. We are fighting this war to get to peace. Like, otherwise, what are we fighting this war for? Or what are we fighting any war for? So in the eyes of the world, if you're not presenting yourself as someone who's fighting for peace, okay, who's going after the bad guys because the bad guys don't want peace, then you're in a very weak position. And this is what's been happening to us. October 7, of course, was shocking. But since October 7, the war has evolved in many different ways. And we have not presented ourselves as a party that wants peace. And when there's peace negotiation, they don't come from us. They come from the Americans. We never fought the war in Lebanon saying, hey, Lebanon, we want peace with you. Hezbollah is in the way. America, please come. Please, please, be a moderator. Please convene us. It didn't come from us. It came from the Americans, and that's a very weak position.
How can that change though? Because you're right. It's like the whole if the whole thing collapsed and the idea of doing things comes from the intention of peace, and that the kind of cloak is gone. How is that retrieved?
Well, I
Or
hope
is it?
that
I mean,
I
what's the next
hope
game?
that
What's the next game plan?
I hope that the next government, whoever that is, will acknowledge that this was a big mistake, and will build a coalition that will allow it to at least present itself as seeking to end these conflicts in peace. For example, to say, hey, we had to move into the demilitarized zone in Syria when the Assad regime collapsed. We're not here there to stay. The demilitarized zone, even according to Israel, is disputed. It's not Israel. Okay, remember, Israel only annexed, the annexation of the Golan is disputed, but Israel only annexed up until our side of the demilitarized zone, which means that even according to Israel, our forces in the demilitarized zone are outside of Israel. Why not say, we are there until we can have security and peace in Syria? President Trump, please come in, help us get peace in Syria. Number one, Lebanon. Okay, we're fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. For what? We want peace with Lebanon. Okay, at least in terms of declaration, let's let's call
Mm.
upon the Americans to do that. Now, what Israel right now is doing is piling up more and more demands on Lebanon. That's why there's not going to be a deal with Lebanon. But the moment the Americans understand that, they will reverse and they will say, no, let's do a border deal. The border deal, which is the most important piece of the historical piece, is essential, and it's within reach. Okay, so I can see a change of government that makes. By the way, a change of government doesn't necessarily mean that Netanyahu is no longer the prime minister. He could be the prime
Sure.
minister in a different format and therefore change his positions. He did it in the past and he could do it in the future. I'm just saying there could be a different approach that puts Israel, at least diplomatically, in a position that it's more countries can relate to it. Because right now, a lot of the countries in the war, I'm sorry, a lot of countries in the world don't understand what we're trying to do, but for when they listen to the right-wing factions of the government who tell you Israel is until the litani, okay, when you listen to that, then countries around the world say, oh, now we understand what's going on in Lebanon. We want to eliminate the Palestinian Authority, so they understand what's going on in Gaza, in the West Bank. Okay, we want to settle. So they listen to the right wing factions of the government. They hear that Israel wants to settle in Gaza, so they say, "Oh, we now understand why Israel doesn't want to make progress on the 20-point plan of Trump." So if in a new government, what could happen is that this message could change, and I think that will have long-term effect, not immediate, but
Mm.
long-term effect on diplomacy, which is different than social media. We know, for
Yeah.
example, in 2006, a lot of the media was against Israel, but the leaders of the countries were for Israel
Well,
in
this
the
is the
war.
thing. This is what I was going to say. I do think that to put a bow onto that final way of changing either perception or execution of these kinds of strategies, I do kind of think that on some level, leadership at the top does have to change. And so, I'm not talking anything politics, anything war, military, or anything, but I do think that there is a kind of weight toward like Netanyahu and what he's represented in this October 7 era that kind of I personally believe that Israel's best efforts to shed some of the negative sentiments that it's currently being felt in social media and among young people and at schools and everything around the world is to start afresh and go deeper than just a change of government, but in fact a change of leadership at the top. That's my personal view.
Now,
Um,
of course, I mean, this is a very legitimate view, and a lot of people believe that. I'm talking diplomatically,
yeah.
okay? Because we know that diplomacy, people take anti-vomit pills a lot of times in diplomacy, and they deal with individuals that they don't like. But what I'm saying is that the positions of Israel, the political positions of Israel, if they change, that will have an effect. Okay, I'm not talking about what it looks like. I'm talking about the substance of it. And but right now, with the current positions of the current government, I don't think there's a single country in the world that I can think of that actually supports our policies. Not even one.
Mm.
So
Listen, Giddy, yeah. Look, hopefully it
we
all
didn't
changes.
speak
We've
about
all
3D printing and repairing them, and you know.
Yeah, I know. This is going to be, I'm sure, part one of an ongoing, probably series we're going to start producing, you and I. But just to give our listeners a teaser of what can come in the future, I feel like that was a good intro episode. But give us an idea of quickly to Kuala makers. You folks are in New York now. The idea is that you are lowering costs for prosthetics. And one of the things I want to highlight, just to bring this all together, is that you have Israelis and Palestinians in the organization working alongside each other. So diplomacy can exist, does exist. You see it on the ground. Talk me through about what you folks do, and talk me through about what it and how you folks are operating.
Okay,
and we have about 2 minutes left. So,
so let me just. So I don't want to start with a correction, but we're an Israeli Jewish American organization that has what we call collaborations around the world. We have local communities that we work with, and one of them is in Ramallah. Okay, so it's not that they are
okay.
kind of one of our global network of communities. To me, it's very important that I have partners on the Palestinian side and in the Arab world. Not just there. We had in the UAE, we had in Bahrain, we had some activity. I mean, we had activities in Turkey. We had in Morocco. To me, it's very, very important to use humanitarian work to build bridges across borders and, of course, across the United States, which is critically important for Israel and for the Jewish world. So, what is the idea? The idea is not just prosthetics. The idea is this: there is a famous saying that 90% of innovation serves 10% of the population, which means that the bottom of the pyramid are structurally excluded from the benefits of innovation. And this is what I wanted to fix, okay? I wanted to drive innovation to create solutions that are deliberately targeting the needs of the most vulnerable populations. One of these groups are people with disabilities, okay? But there's also elderly, there's also poor people. And there's also a huge difference if you live in a metropolitan area versus if you live in a rural area. So you live in Israel. I'm from Israel, so we know there's huge difference of access if you're in Tel Aviv or if you're in the Negev. If you're a Jewish family in the Negev or Bedouin community in the Negev. If you're in the far north of Israel, okay. So I wanted to uh, uh, equalize access to affordable and accessible solutions among people. Remember, it's a project initiated in Israel, initially in Israel. We're now in the United States, or in the United States and around the world. The beauty of it is that now you can do it because of the power of technology. You can actually do everything that I'm saying at costs that are incredibly affordable to a country, to a city, and also to the world. That's the beauty of this period now, that we could actually do this, meaning we could create thousands of solutions and make them available to millions of people at near zero cost. So,
What,
so that's that's my focus, and I'd love to
one of the
talk to.
things, and I want to wrap it up quickly, unfortunately, because we have a hard stop in a couple of minutes. But one of the things that always struck me when it comes to disability is that even though it's a minority of people who are in the disability sector, it actually has the potential to impact and affect anyone. Like anyone can, God forbid, become disabled at any time. Anyone can become a caregiver for someone who has become disabled. So it really is a
It's a global problem.
global
It's a
initiative,
universal
even though it's a
problem.
minority of people who are directly at least impacted. Giddy, listen, I have to let you go soon. You have other places to be. You're a very busy man. I have one last question for you. I want you to answer as quickly as possible. I normally have a longer list of final questions. Last one. You were the youngest person at Camp David in 2000. What would the 29-year-old Giddy make of what you're doing today? What would he think of everything that we've just discussed today?
He would not believe it's even possible. It wouldn't be in the
Amazing. Amazing. Giddy, thank you so much for your time today. I really hope we reconnect in the future and continue many more conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.